Hi everyone, it's Nachman here from ConnectBooks. Okay, we're going to give it another minute as attendees are rolling in. On this webinar, what we'll primarily focus is on the new forecasting report that ConnectBooks built, so that you can get greater insights and detail and understand exactly how all this works. I'm just going to wait another minute, and as I load up my screens and just wait for another few attendees to come in. Alrighty, I do want to let everybody know that the webinar is being recorded, so that we will be able to share this afterwards with attendees, and you can share with your coworkers or other staff. Alrighty. Now we will have a Q&A session after the webinar, so any questions you have, feel free to just put into the chat so that we get a good, I can follow up with the questions as well. All right. Okay. We're gonna start off right over here. Okay, so let's jump into this. And let's dive straight into this. And as I mentioned before, I would love some questions. So, just we'll have the Q&A chat open. Colleen, do we have like the Q&A chat or just the regular chat? I don't see the Q&A.
Yes, they can ask in the Q&A or the chat. They should have access to both.
Okay, cool.
Might just need to click on more to get access to the Q&A.
Oh, got it. You got to go more to Q&A. Now I see it. Got it. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, just go to more and Q&A and just put it in there. And then after the webinar, we'll go through all the questions. So let's go what we're going to cover today. So what we're going to cover today is the inventory problem that multi-channel sellers face every day, and how the reporting forecast works. Also reading the reports, the columns, all the different, red flags, customizations. We also have purchase order ETA intelligence. So, in case somebody, like, for example, we'll dive into this, what this means. And then we have now sharing warehouses and regional forecasting. 5 and 6 is pretty complicated, but a lot of fun. As I say, the more complicated, the more fun that is. But the goal of our system is to simplify it. So we'll show you, and then how to generate POs directly from the report. All right. So what's the replenishment? What is the biggest challenge with forecasting? Stockouts, overstock, chaos, and multi-region gaps, which is the other stuff. So let's go. Okay, so this is really how the forecasting report looks. I'm going to, let me a second. I'm going to jump back for a second to the actual report, because I like just showing it on the tool what it looks like. So first of the way how you would get to the report is you go to Report tab, Inventory, and then this is the Inventory Forecasting Report, which is what you would pull up. Okay. Now, okay. On the inventory forecasting is you would have different columns right over here. You have your reorder quantity, which that is meant to reorder. You'll have a reorder date. And then we have sales velocity. So the sales velocity, if you open it up, the way that works is that you get an average from 6 different times, okay? There needs to be some text updates here, which are probably going to be coming in the next week, a little better explanatory, but this means that this is not for a total of 3 days, meaning this is the average you sell per day from the last 3 days, okay? This is the average you sell per day from the last 7 days. This is the average you sell per day from the last 30 days, and same goes to the bottom 3. Now, what happens with Amazon is it changes a lot, okay? So like I can have a huge spike at one point, and then we can, things can just move differently. So what we have done is we pull a percentage from each one of these different time frames, and then we come to a weighted velocity on the bottom. Okay. Now, if these are now when you set up ConnectBooks, meaning you set up our inventory system, there's default settings. In the default settings, which we can show later on the account, that's when you set up all this information. However, that's what gets used to plug in, and this are the default settings that ConnectBooks use. Now, these settings can be changed on an item level as well, and these can also be done via Excel, meaning you can do manually. You can go here, edit, and say, let's say only want to calculate based on the last 3 days. I would type in here 100%, move this to 0, and move this, let's say, also to 0. And you get what I'm saying. I'll move all these down to 0, and then my weighted velocity would be 77.95 based on the last 3 days. So you can play around with this, change it all different ways. But the idea is that you want to get the velocity based on the whole time frame. So because sometimes in Amazon you'll have certain spikes on certain days, or sometimes you sell more or sell less. So that's how you average it out through different time frames. As I said before, this is when we set it up, we have one general rule for the whole account. You can change this on individual product level. So these certain brands that you want to have different velocities or different ways, you can change it and move it around. Now, this could also go per warehouse. Where primarily this would differ a lot is, for example, if you do WFS on Amazon. Okay, so when you go by default, you have a global. Okay, this is global across all your warehouses. If you do FBA, all of a sudden you see the velocities change. Like in transit, there's no sales from an in-transit warehouse. The default warehouse would be more if you do, let's say, wholesale or maybe FBM at every different warehouse. Seasonality, that's coming soon. And then we also have purchase settings. Purchase settings is basically, let's go through these different stuff. I do have Moishi, our product manager, on the call. Might need him help to chime in a lot on certain things. But let's go through the different stuff over here. So the lead time basically the lead time affects the date, right? So for example, if let's say if we forecast that, let's say we'll run out of stock January 30th, but it's going to take, let's say, 30 days to get from when the vendor ships it till we receive it. Let's say it takes 30 days, then we need to place a purchase order January 1st, not January 30th when we run out of time. So that's the lead time. It's very simple. So the lead time affects mainly the date when we should order. Now, then the reorder frequency, that really defines how many days you should reorder. Moishi.
Yes, Nachman, how are you? Yes,
Yeah,
how are you?
All right. So the reorder frequency, that's really meant to reorder for 30 days at a time. Meaning, you want to explain that a little better to me?
Sure. So the order frequency controls how often you want to make a purchase order. So let's say the lead time is 30 days, and a simple scenario, let's say you sell one a day. So if you have now 30 units in stock, you have enough for 30 days, and the system will tell you not to make a reorder. But tomorrow you look at the report and you only have enough for 29 days. So the system is going to tell you to make a reorder because you only have enough for 29 days and the lead time is 30. But what's going to be the reorder amount? It's going to be 1 because you didn't set a reorder frequency. Reorder frequency is essentially a control that the user sets, and he could say, I don't want to make another reorder for the next 30 days. That means whenever I make a purchase order, I don't want to make another purchase order for the next 20 days, 30 days, and so on. So if the reorder frequency would be 30, as soon as you're low in stock, I'm going to make sure that the recommended amount to reorder is going to make sure that you don't have to make another PO for 30 days from when you make this purchase order.
Got it. Yeah. So that explains it very well. So basically, if you have stock for 29 days, and then basically if you have a 30-day, like for example, we have a simple scenario where let's say you sell 1 unit per day, right? And you have 30 days on hand. So minute 1 day goes by and I have 29 units left in hand. Should you make a PO for 1 unit because then you're back up, or should you make an order for 30 days? So that's how you challenge when you make an order, for how many days do you want to keep stock? That's a reorder frequency. Okay. The inventory buffer is like, what do you want? It's like, I would call it more like a safety stack. So, how many orders, how much inventory do you want to keep on hand at any given time. So the inventory buffer will the way how we forecast is we look what your sales were based on your velocity, and then we put in the inventory buffer, and then on top of that you have based on the reorder frequency. Now the override velocity is basically if this particular product you're saying like, okay, don't make this calculation, for example, and you wanted to override the velocity and always reorder like for a certain product. Or let's say, for example, it says it doesn't have enough sales history, right? So let's say it's a new product, and let's say we can't look back 180 days or whatever it is, you can override the velocity and put it over here. Now, then there's two other cool features. We have the exclude no stock days. So let's say a day there's no stock, then ConnectBooks will. So basically, the way usually it works, forecasting tools. Let's say you have 30 units sold in the last month, okay, and that's 30 days. Now, what if I tell you 15 of the 30 days you're out of stock? So really, you're not selling 1 unit per day. You're really selling 2 units per day because you had no stock for half of the month. So a day that there's no stock, ConnectBooks will not will not contribute any sales to those days. So ConnectBooks only counts as sales when there is stock. Now, exclude the outlier days is like if there's like some sort of abnormal spike or drop, then ConnectBooks will exclude it based on those days. So this is really on the velocity, how the velocity.
I want to add
works.
one thing that's not on this demo account, something that we released afterwards, is the MOQ, which is also an item level, which every user will see on production. You will see another box over here called MOQ, which is the minimum order quantity, which defines, let's say your vendor only lets you order 500 units at a time. You can set it on each item, and when we make the purchase order, it's going to take that into account.
Right. I'll also share. I'm gonna also share the slides here in the chat if anybody wants the slide deck as well. We'll share that. Let me see. I can share. Here, we'll share the slide deck as well, so you can go. People who have any questions, can see that as well over there. Colleen, I think I can't message everybody, so if you can, I put the link in the chat to you, so if you can share it with everyone. All right, so let's just continue on here. So what we have covered so far is how ConnectBooks gets to the sales velocity. Now then the total, simple what total available stock is, meaning this is on hand, what's available what's in transit, and then what's available, you get a breakdown per warehouse, which is really nice. So this is actually available to sell, but let's say I have now in transit FBA 2,000 units, so it's not available. So this is also part one that just to be careful is when you set up ConnectStock to make sure that the in-transit warehouse, the type of it is in transit. We also have reserved our orders, pending orders that come in and haven't shipped yet. Now, then we have incoming. So the incoming is if you create purchase orders in ConnectBooks and you already sent a PO to the vendor, then ConnectBooks will have showing you that there's POs coming in here. Now, there's a very cool feature over here, which one stuff we discussed is the ETA, right? So with the ETA, it's saying that we have more units coming in. Moishi.
Yes.
So with the ETA, what happens exactly with the ETA? So if there isn't enough stock, meaning if the ETA is too late out, what happens afterwards?
It's if the ETA is too late out, let's say you ordered units and it's arriving in 5 months, and you're running out of inventory next month, and based on your velocity settings, you want to make a reorder now, we're going to tell you to make a reorder now, even though you have, let's say, 20,000 units coming in 5 months from now, because otherwise you're going to have a stock out for 3 months.
Right. So this is also important to know that means to say when ConnectBooks tells you to reorder, it looks at the purchase order. So for example, today is January 1st, and let's say you have enough stock for the month, but if we see, okay, more stock is coming in January 15, we're not going to tell you to order. However, and the way how we know when it's coming in is that when you create a purchase order, there's an ETA column, and you put in a date on the ETA. So if let's say you put in let's say this is not coming in for another 5 months, then ConnectBooks will tell you that you have to reorder. So it will tell you to reorder. We could turn off this feature, meaning this feature could be turned on or off. So we have had certain customers who have told us, please don't tell me when to order. Like, meaning don't tell me about the ETA and stuff like that. He's like, I already made an order. If I'll be out of stock for a week till my new stock comes in, there's not much I can do. So then we can turn it off. So
Yeah,
this
so that's to
feature,
address, so something that Dave Thompson just asked a very good question. So is this something that the system will flag as an abnormal situation? Because in a lot of cases, users will say, I have 50,000 units coming in 3 months from now. I don't want to make another purchase order. And if you tell me to make another purchase order, I'm going to get confused. I'm not going to know. I'm going to overorder. So this is a setting on an account. You could decide whether you want us to look at the ETA or not. So if someone doesn't want us to look at the ETA and not be so smart, it's a simple setting. You turn it off on the forecasting settings. You just turn it off, and we will not look at the ETA. If you ordered 50,000 units, we'll assume as if it's going to be available tomorrow, and just not tell you to reorder.
cool. Okay. The question that Ellie has will cover about FBA stock. We'll cover in the sharing settings soon in the warehousing. Okay, days in stock. You can see over here, based on your inventory and how much the stock is left. Now, this calculation, actually, this doesn't include any POs, right?
Correct.
Right. So this is just your stock on hand, how many days this is left till it, depletes and it uses up. Now, a couple of other important factors. This report is not a live report, okay? What I mean by not live is that this report gets generated once a day. Once a day, the data gets generated. So for example, if you, let's say, created now a PO a minute ago, it's not going to show up here. The next morning, when you come and take an NetBooks, the data will show in there. Now, I know that sounds annoying because people update constantly and they want to see it right away. The challenge we faced is that this is so much data to load that we need to have like an engine that prepares it and loads it. However, you can see over here in the top the timestamp. Okay, so you see when it was the last updated. And if you make any changes, you hit the recalculate button, and this will take a few minutes till it updates. And then once it updates, it does. So ideally, we prepare the data like once a day, and then the data gets loaded in. If you have to make any changes, for example, you want to put in POs, or let's say an item is not mapped good, or let's say something doesn't add up and you have to change around a few different stuff, do what you got to do, then hit the recalculate, and then just make sure to remember the timestamp. And once the timestamp is updated, you'll know that the new data is being affected. All right, so we're gonna jump a little further over here. Okay, so this is on the PO. We have the where we just discussed. You can have the ETAs and stuff like that. Okay, let's go now to the pooled warehouses. So the pooled warehouses basically works is here's a challenge. Okay, so oops, a second. So in the pooled warehouses, we have FBA and we have WFS, right? So let's say in FBA, you still have 5,000 units. However, in WFS, you only have 3 days left. So the system is not telling you anything. It's going to say, hey, based on your velocity, everything is, looking fine. Because you have a lot of stock in FBA. So what happens with a lot of tools that we have seen and is that but what a lot of tools what we have seen is that when they do an FBA, meaning when they have inventory in 2 different warehouses, especially with FBA, WFS, and TikTok is coming up. And I know TikTok has TikTok fulfillment. I'm not sure if Temu has a fulfillment service, but TikTok does. So people are starting to spread their inventory around different places, and the challenge that we face is people, most inventory systems won't tell you to reorder because you still have stock. The challenge is that WFS is running low. So this is one big issue that people face. Now, what we have set up is something called non-sharing warehouses. So a non-sharing warehouse, basically what's going to happen is it's set up on an individual warehouse. And the idea really is that you separate each warehouse, that it shouldn't share inventory with a different warehouse. When you do that, Like for example, if we go to, let me see. So I still have the, oh, no, not here. I gotta do it under the warehouse. So you have to go to the lists and find the individual warehouse. And then on the individual warehouse, what you do is you have something called warehouse settings where you set up whether it shares inventory or not. So if this, in this case, this shares inventory. But if, for example, this warehouse will not share inventory, basically what happens is we'll tell you that you have to replenish this product because you don't have enough, you don't, I keep pressing on the button. You don't have enough inventory. So the idea of the not sharing warehouses is really more like WFS, FBA, or let's say you have a wholesale warehouse where you have some inventory prepared for wholesale customers, and you don't want to share that. Because you have that allocated or those stuff are allocated for different things, and you want to keep separate systems for FBA and WFS, for wholesale or WFS, then you set up the warehouse shouldn't share inventory, and based on that, the system will tell you what to reorder. Now, then we also have regional forecasting. So the regional is basically the same idea of not sharing warehouses, but just on a broader scale. So regional basically, you have inventory in the US, you have inventory in the EU, right? So let's say, for example, we spoke with a customer, we were building the forecasting, and we say, like, what are the issues you're facing? And they explained to us, like, look, if we have, let's say, 5,000, units on hand in the US, and the EU is basically has nothing left, so it's not going to tell us to reorder in the EU because it says you still have 5,000 units on hand. And he said, it doesn't make sense for me to ship inventory from the US to EU. Why? Because I'm an importer from China. And when I import from China, I'd rather just make a new shipment from China directly to EU. It's way too much, it's way too costly for me to ship from US to EU. So I'd rather just create a new purchase order from the US directly from China directly to the EU. And that's how we import. So when you set up ConnectBooks, Connect Stack with the forecasting, one of the things we can also do is we can set up region tracking. So when we set up regions, you basically would have a region called the EU, and you'll have a region called the US. And then you have to nest each warehouse under the proper region. So that's how when you forecast, you can group the forecasting report by region, and it will show you what you need to purchase for each region. And basically the way the sales work is that the sales get calculated based on which warehouse it ships out of. Meaning we bring in the sales from the channel, but every channel gets connected to a warehouse, and based on for which warehouse it ships, that's how we calculate, and each warehouse gets connected to a region. So the region settings, that all needs to be set up in the file, and basically once you do it, so when we go back to our forecasting report, we just see, let's see this.
I don't think this demo account has regions.
I had one that did have. You know which one did? Let me see. So we can set up different regions over here. I still have an older version. So just if anybody's, looks does it in ConnectBooks, they'll see different ones. But basically, over here we have something called the default region, and I can, you can add on more regions over here. So what happens is, let me see this. No, this is region. Oh, so I got it. Moshe, where do you add on the regions? Under the lists?
Yes.
Oh, so over here you would have regions, and you can add a new region where I can, let's say, call this US. And I can make another region over here called, let's say EU. And then what you do is under each warehouse, so let's say FBA warehouse, I would go over here and then just, let's say, assign it the US region. Now, what's going to happen is with the forecasting report, you would have the option to group it by region. So basically, since everything's under the default region, it all pops in over here. But that would be the idea, is that you would be able to group it over here. So you would have different groupings, and it would go based on the region. You could also group it by vendor and or item, but in order to group it by vendor, you will need to set it up under the item tab, meaning each item has to have a preferred vendor. Once the item has a preferred vendor, then you could group it by vendor. So basically the concept of the sharing is that in a simple format is basically like if you don't want to mix your Amazon and Walmart inventory, so that would be non-sharing warehouses. If you don't want to mix your US and EU inventory, then that's where you would set up regions. That's to explain it in a very simple format. So here you have like a little image where basically we have like an EU warehouse, and then you can, and then like for example, we can meaning we can take it a step further. You can have in a region, you could say that it shouldn't ship. So you can have a Europe warehouse where that's for your Europe stock, and then you can have another region, let's say for the US, and in the US you could set up two different warehouses, which you have for let's say FBA and WFS, and those of them don't, those of them don't ship. So basically, in one region, you got multiple warehouses, and that doesn't mean that each warehouse has to share with the other one. So you have a region which is more like a global, and then you dig into more like each region on its own, and you set it up from there. Okay, so now one of the things you do is now that you understand how to split everything up properly, you would be able to go to the forecasting report, and then over here is where you have like a checkbox, and you could check off all these other stuff, and then from here is where you create a purchase order. So, once meaning these items don't have a preferred vendor, but once you set up a preferred vendor for all these products, then basically it will automatically take all these products and just, dump it into a PO. Once it's dumped in a purchase order, you would have all this information dumped into a purchase order, and then from there on, you would be able to send it out.
Just a quick
Now-
note, it's not going to be saved right away as a regular purchase order. There's going to be a new tab under the purchase order section called forecasting purchase order page where the user has to review it, and then they can save it.
Nice. Okay. Now, once you do that, you create a purchase order. So you adjust it and approve it. Now, with a purchase order, remember that we also have units of measure. So, for example, if you want to order stuff by the case, for example, if you have a certain amount of units come into a case, it will you have to on the item list. So when you go to the items, over here you have units of measure. So you have a default for invoices. That means for your sales, default for bills, that is going to be used in your purchase order. So based on if you have units of measure set up and you want to purchase by cases, that will be your default. It would auto split it out by region, meaning it can make if you have different regions, it will make different POs per region. And then you also have an MOQ, which Moshe mentioned earlier. Like let's say, for example, you need to reorder 1,500 pieces, but you have an MOQ for 2,000. So then you'll order your MOQ. You have an option on an item level to set an MOQ, and when you set it on the item level MOQ, it's going to order based on that. We also have custom PO numbers, which is a setting. For example, you can have an auto generate like 1002, 1003, but if you want to have custom PO numbers, you're able to do that as well. So what you got to do, what we're saying is in terms of, getting this all set up right, is you want to first make sure that your default settings are done correctly. So under the file settings, you'll have forecasting report. You want to make sure the lead time buffer and all those settings are done right. And then if you want to set the item velocities, so for example, if let's say you want to override certain products on the velocity, so the way you would do that is under the item tab. So under the item tab, you can export something called purchase settings, and then you get that in an Excel sheet. Once you have an Excel, you can upload it, per individual item that you want to update. So on the file settings, which is going to be over here, and there's a new view, which I don't have. On the file settings is where you would update the forecasting settings. Like for example, over here I have the defaults. So these defaults gets done on a global level. And then if you ever want to update it on an item level, meaning you could always do it on a individual product when you're in this report over here. Meaning if you want to update the velocity per item, you could also do it here. But if you want to do a bunch at a time, you can go to the item list and export in Excel and do it from there. The other thing you also want to do is configure different warehouses. Another thing is you want to exclude unsellable warehouses. So under the warehouse settings, you will have an option to select, meaning you have to go to the lists and you have to go to your warehouse lists. And then on the warehouse list, you'll have those three settings: regions, sharing, and non-sellable. So if you want to utilize regions, as we spoke before, separating US and EU, you would first need to enable the regions, set up a region, and then take the warehouse and configure it to a region. And then once each warehouse configured the region, you'll have an option to say if this warehouse shares, and then another option to say this warehouse is non-sellable. So this is very important. Like when we pull in sales from like when we pull in returns from Amazon and they're not sellable, you want, and those go to the if you have an FBA unsellable warehouse, then you want to configure that warehouse is not sellable, and then it gets excluded from your stock and it gets excluded from there. And then you have the option to recalculate. As I showed you before, the report is not a live report. This gets generated once a day. If you make a bunch of changes, do all your changes, and then just hit the recalculate button, and then ConnectBooks will pull it from there. Alrighty. So if anybody has any questions, I would love to answer them now. Let me just see. We have some open questions here from Dave. Let me see. Okay. Let me see here. So let me just go back a second.
I think maybe we could start with Ellie's question. Ellie Rosenfeld asked the question: how can you use the stock and FBA to calculate your inventory for other channels? So if you do want to use FBA's inventory to supply other channels like TikTok or any other marketplace, then you simply leave a set that the FBA warehouse shares inventory, and it will not trigger a purchase order if you're low in TikTok or Walmart.
Basically, I mean, they technically in that case they would mean to say. I actually would take it a step further, because if you're using your WFS, if Amazon is being multi-channel, like Amazon's your fulfillment center, and your WFS orders are being shipped through FBA, then what I would say is you wouldn't even use a WFS warehouse, because your inventory is lying in FBA. So when you set up ConnectStack, what you'd want to do is you'd want to connect your WFS inventory directly to FBA. But if you, and in general, meaning the only time the sharing setting really comes in is like if you have stock across different places, so then you enable the sharing, meaning where you want to, order individually for each one. Ellie, I think that answers your question. If you have any other questions, just let us know in the chat. Now to moving back to Dave's questions, he's saying a clarification: when a stock order is projected, clients will often need to resort to air freight, but need a red flag that there's an exceptional situation. So I'm not sure what you mean by a red flag, but from what I'm understanding is if let's say they have enough stock for 1 month. It's January 1st. So they have enough stock for 1 month. They have a purchase order, but that's not coming until March. So basically for the month of February, they'll be out of stock. So ConnectBooks will recommend for them to put in. So what I would do is I would put in a new PO with an earlier ETA based on when the air freight is going to land. And in that case, you know that, okay, air freight is landing soon. And in that case, ConnectBooks won't recommend you again to reorder. In terms of as an exceptional situation, I'm not sure how to log that correctly. I mean, it's mainly going to be the air freight cost. I usually keep it as a separate line on the P&L. Whenever I do landed cost for clients, we only do it for ocean freight. We'll never do it for air freight. We always tell people air freight is not the way to run your business. I mean, this is just my take on it, but I always tell people air freight is not the way to run your business. So I always like to keep it as a separate line item on the P&L and show them, okay, this is how much money you spent this year for air freights. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. We don't have anything in Q&A, and nobody has any other questions. So if nobody has any other questions, then we will wrap up the webinar. And We appreciate everybody for joining. And as said earlier, this webinar is recorded, so we will share it out. And we will be sending out an email with a link. So if you want to share this with any clients, or you want to share this webinar with teammates, to understand better how forecasting works, we'll also send along the slides and the recording, so you can share with any one of your clients or coworkers or employees, whoever you want with. And as usual, if anybody has any other questions, always feel free to reach out to us. The best way to contact us is just visit our website, connectbooks.com. We have live chat, five-star customer support available at any time, and just ask us any questions. I'm going to do our best to get back to you with the right answer as quick as possible. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.